It's so cloudy here that I have to say I have my windows like parted. I have my rain light on. We are in the midst of Hurricane Lee weekend. He hasn't touched down for us just yet here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but if you do hear rain come and go and the lighting is a little bit wonky, I've tried to do what I can to stabilize it for this video, but we can only do what we can do. So for today's video, I wanted to talk about some fantasy fall recommendations that I think just hit the best for this time of year specifically. I wanted to keep this female fantasy authors. I do just think it's important to continuously kind of put women at the forefront of a genre that for a long time was male dominated. So for this video in particular, I am going to recommend female authors for fall fantasy recommendations. So without further ado, let's get to some of the recommendations. So the first thing I wanted to recommend, and I wanted to give it the spotlight of being the first book recommended in this video, would be Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. This is a Baba Yaga retelling, but everything about it just screams fall. So in this, we are following a brother and sister that lost touch and are not on good terms anymore when they inherit a sentient moving house that is on legs. This house feels just as much as we feel. It communicates, maybe not in the exact same way. It's not able to talk to us, but we are able to gather its thoughts on things by its reaction. And unfortunately, the brother and sister in this tale are being hunted down by the Long Shadow Man who wants possession of this house for reasons our brother and sister duo do not understand, and legacy of their house kind of unfolds as we continue in on the story. And this book is so atmospheric. It was very different to what I've been reading lately and what I feel is popularized lately. It's just such a breath of fresh air. And I really couldn't recommend it enough. And I do feel it deserves a lot more hype for what it got. I believe it was a release last year, if I'm not mistaken, a new release at the end of 2022. And I do think, yeah, October 2022. I do think it was released for that fall time. So if you haven't heard of this, I definitely would recommend, and I would definitely say at least check it out. Next, I just feel like it wouldn't be a video of mine unless I did recommend a Robin Hobb. And for the fall season, I would definitely recommend Assassin's Apprentice and the Farseer trilogy in general. But specifically, Assassin's Apprentice, we are following Fitz, who is the bastard son of the reigning king, as he's trying to find his place in the world. I believe I recommended this in my last fall recommendations video as well. It has a very looser magic system in the first book, but that definitely grows as the series continues and as you get further in the Robin Hobb universe. So don't be a little bit alarmed if a lot of this is foundational, but because of that, I think it makes a really great fall read because it's so atmospheric, because we spend so much time getting to know the world and the characters. It's so slow moving, and I feel like fall and winter are great times to pick up these books where you're not necessarily trying to get through everything as fast as possible and look for easier gratification. You have more time indoors, you have more time off from work and school, so you can kind of take some time with some of the slower books. Next, I would recommend The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I feel like there's quite a glare happening because of my ring light, but this is the UK edition that my wonderful friend sent me. But in this book, we are following Addie LaRue, who is from 17th century France, and she is promised to marry this man that she knows she will be unhappy with. All her life, she has only wanted to be free. She doesn't want to be attached. She wants to be her own person. So she starts to pray at night to be free of this man and makes a deal with the devil to be free. And suddenly she realizes that everyone in her life has forgotten her. And as soon as she walks into a room, even if she goes through the entire introduction, they don't remember her from before, even her family included, and they won't remember her after the conversation if they leave the room or if she leaves the room, basically as soon as she leaves sight. So we follow Addie LaRue as she journeys throughout history, and we find she's muses for these really spectacular pieces of art or music, and she has really lived a full life that she's wanted, but it hasn't come without its sacrifices, unfortunately, until one day she stumbles into Henry in modern day times that was able to remember her. And of course, as you can imagine, she is very surprised, and a friendship and eventual romance ensues between the two of them, and it is just so atmospheric and gorgeous to read about. There is bisexual representation. It is just one of the more lyrical, beautiful fantasies that I own. And again, with it being this time of year that we're stuck inside, you can kind of take your time and read some of those more lyrical, slow moving fantasies. Staying on the same vein of V.E. Schwab, I pulled Vicious, which is a sort of darker fantasy, but it surrounds in academia, so I felt like it would be perfect for this time of year. Basically, we are following two friends turned into arch nemesis that are EO. So in this very grounded world, we have extraordinary people that through their college time were able to discover how to, via adrenaline and close calls with death, kind of trigger something that is in our DNA to push us to that next level of superpower. And these two men have very different visualizations of how they believe these powers should be utilized in the world, therefore creating two arch nemesis. We actually follow the world's villain in this, and it made for a really interesting take. And honestly, like, neither of the characters in this are really all that great, and you're kind of following the lesser of two evils. But at the end of the day, again, very atmospheric because it's collegiate. I feel like it really leans into that fall atmosphere, and the dark academia in any kind of fantasy you're going to notice is a trend in this video. So again, the trend continues with Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I absolutely adored this novel, but I will say off the hop that this is a very polarizing read. If you're going into this, you have to go into this knowing you're going to be confused for at least half of this book, as Leigh Bardugo kind of throws you into the story head first and takes her time catching up the information to make it all make sense. I'm definitely planning on doing a reread of this, as I read Hellbent this past year and really enjoyed it, but it really left me wanting the atmospheric tone of Ninth House. I feel like Ninth House just did it perfectly. It is a dark academia. We are following the 9 houses of Yale. The 9 houses of Yale, each of them practicing a different type of dark magic, and Alex, who is our main hero, pairs up with Darlington, who is the local good boy in her society, to ensure that none of the houses get out of hand doing magic they shouldn't do. And when some deaths start to occur on campus, seemingly tied to dark magic, Alex and Darlington are kind of on the hunt to figure out what's going on. But this book specifically, because it's set in New Haven and set in the fall, and it revolves around dark magic, there's just so many elements of this that I read it in the fall time. I really cannot recommend it enough. If there is a time you've been waiting to jump into this, again, let it be this time of year. It's never going to feel truer than in September, October, November, when you see all of your leaves changing, the air is getting crisp, it's just a little bit chillier, it's darker earlier. This is going to lend for this being the best reading experience, in my opinion. But again, you just have to know that you are going to be confused for like quite a while when you read it. Okay, next I am going to recommend Babel by R.F. Kuang. This was my favorite book in the year it was released. I believe it was 2021 or 2. Absolutely loved this. I personally put this in the hands of so many customers. I sold out in my bookstore twice just by me reordering, loving, and really pushing this novel. This basically is a very loose fantasy, so you should know that going in, that it's a more historical fiction than it is a fantasy, and I do think that's a big misconception, because R.F. Kuang initially released the Poppy War Trilogy and did what I feel was a pivot for this release. I do feel like a lot of people go in with the misconception that it's going to be another Poppy War. That is not the case at all, though she does continue on with a lot of the same themes of marginalized groups and giving a voice to the voiceless and who controls the narrative. I do feel that there are a lot of repeating themes from the Poppy War. Unfortunately, I think people don't like to necessarily take their time, and that has led to this being another very polarizing release. But this is an absolute 10 out of 10 for me. It was my 5-star for last year. It was my favorite book that I read last year, so I would definitely recommend this. A big reason I believe she chose to make it so slower paced is because we spend a lot of time with Robin kind of getting ingrained into English society and seeing how disorienting that can be for a child who is only known one way, and basically the erasure of a culture as you're ingrained into a more English society and having to really leave everything you know and love and believe behind so you can be accepted into this new world. Robin then progresses in age and makes his way to Oxford, where a lot of the magic is revealed. Magic in this world is tied very strongly to language, and those who possess language possess a lot of magic. And I won't give away too much more, because going into it blind and just taking the journey that R.F. Kuang has created and allowing yourself to learn and to absorb this world and all of the nuances that she's exploring as she takes you through this really interesting fantasy adventure, I think is to the benefit of the reader. I also forgot to say, it also has really great fall vibes. I mean, Oxford at the start of a new year in the 1800s, the turn of the 19th century, really, you can't ask for anything more atmospheric than that. Next, I want to recommend A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, and really just this duology in general. I believe this is best read in the month of September, early October, kind of the changing of the seasons. We are following Jack, who has been away from his island for about 10 years studying music, when he is called back to the island by an old nemesis of his that she and him never got along as children, but the urgency of her begging for his return really does stir something in him. And when he gets back to the island, he realizes that there's a lot of young girls who are going missing, and the future leader of his clan, which is his old nemesis Adara, is tasking him with finding these young women, ensuring him that he is the only one able to do so. And it is just a wild ride that you're going to take on this adventure. This tumultuous elemental magic that's tied to music and tied to legacy, heavily steeped in this sort of folklore. I do really feel that A River Enchanted is a bit of an unsung beauty in the fantasy realm. I do feel like it is also a classic in the making. Not only is the magic tied specifically with music, but also the writing itself for Rebecca Ross is so lyrical. It takes its time. Everything feels so tangible in this world. You can smell everything, you can hear everything, you can see the characters, you can feel their emotions through the pages, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful journey that you get to take. And Rebecca Ross is really, I feel, setting the bar lately with her fantasy, specifically atmospheric fantasy, and how like compulsively page turning all of her fantasy seems to be. Every time I start a Rebecca Ross, I'm just unable to put it down until I finish it. When I have to close the book for work or because I have to run errands, I'm thinking about her story, I'm thinking about her characters, where is it gonna go, until I finish that book. So if you're looking for a more page-turning fantasy for the fall season, this is definitely one I would recommend. So I also wanted to recommend The Helm of Midnight. This is book 1 in the 5 Penalties trilogy. So this is a very interesting fantasy where there is a heavy mystery tied to this fantasy world. It is a dark fantasy, but it is paired with a serial killer mystery aspect. So nothing says fall like that, but I'm actually going to, for one of the few times in my channel, read from the flap. Because it is a mystery, I don't want to give too much away. So in a daring and deadly heist, thieves have made away with an artifact of terrible power, the death mask of Louis Carbon. Made by the master craftsman, it is imbued with the spirit of a monster from history, a serial murderer who terrorizes the city. Now Charbon is loose once more, killing from beyond the grave, but these murders are different from before, not simply random, but the work of a deliberate mind probing for answers to a sinister question. Krona and her fellow regulators must enter the mind of madness to stop this insatiable killer while facing the terrible truths left in his wake. So, I feel like that's a good summary, but there's so much more in this fantasy series, and honestly the last few chapters will leave you burning for book 2. I'm rereading this one this month that we're currently in, maybe early October, so I can move on to book 2, and I'm so excited for it. This is the perfect dark fantasy if you're looking for something this season that is a little bit on the spookier side with a little harder edge than maybe like a Ninth House. And last but not least, I also wanted to just give a general recommendation from one of my favorite authors of all time, which is N.K. Jemisin. She has about 3 series that I would recommend: the Inheritance Trilogy, the Broken Earth Trilogy, and the City We Became duology. I would say starting with the Inheritance Trilogy, which was her first trilogy that she released, I think would be to the benefit, but N.K. Jemisin is a author that almost beyond all has the ability to really throw you into a world and make you fall in love with her characters simultaneously. She has the ability to continue to have this fast moving environment while also making you fall in love with the characters and do some really great character work, which I don't think is necessarily the easiest thing to balance. Many of the books that I recommended today, like Robin Hobb or like Babel, R.F. Kuang, they're able to do character building really well with a slower plot attached. Or we have The Helm of Midnight, or by Marina Lostetter, or Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which kind of does the opposite, which is compulsively readable and page turning, but not necessarily spending the longest amount of time getting to know the characters. So it tends to be one or the other, but N.K. Jemisin does a really beautiful job of doing both. And if I could recommend 2 authors for you to take away from this video, it would be N.K. Jemisin and R.F. Kuang as like my top tier of fantasy for this season particularly. The only reason I have not pulled down some of her works, I mean, you can see book 2 of The City We Became right here, but her Broken Earth trilogy is at the very top of my bookshelf, and I can't actually reach it unless I stand on the chair that I'm sitting on for this video, which I did not feel like doing, but absolutely would recommend. 10 out of 10 author. I think The City We Became is the lowest amount of stars I did give for a series, and it still was a 3.5 star. Inheritance Trilogy was a 4-star. Broken Earth Trilogy was a 5-star, and I am planning on rereading N.K. Jemisin at the early set of 2024, probably in that first quarter. So I'm very excited to get back into her writing and back into her world, as I believe she has a new release coming out here soon, or that she's working on her next novel. That's just word of mouth. I've heard it from a couple of friends, but it has left me eager to get back into her writing. So obviously there is a plethora of authors that you can choose from, a plethora of fantasy books that really feel the most amazing when you read them in the fall. So this is just a video to talk about some of my favorites that I would definitely recommend that have stood the test of time for me. But that's going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.